Steven, we made it again. Another week. We
Another
did it.
week
and the new
without-
year.
Yes. Happy New Year, sir.
Happy New Year to you as well, and to everyone in the chat. First
You didn't
new
make all
episode.
these, you didn't make all these unrealistic New Year's resolution things, have you?
Usually, yeah, I do.
Does it stick?
We'll find out. We'll find out.
We'll
You do
find
pretty.
out.
I do pretty good on them usually.
Some
We'll talk.
people
Maybe we'll
fall
talk
off the
about that
wagon
later.
a week in.
We'll talk about the
you know.
resolutions later. But first, let's talk about people in the chat. We got Steve M. We got Wolfenaz. We got Franklin Ares. We got Graphics Arcade. Jennifer Wyatt there. Hello. Welcome.
Jennifer still
Goofy
here
Foot.
every week.
Yep, every week. Goofy Foot's here as well. Paul is here, and Bill's Retro Gaming Show. Welcome, everyone. Oh, and 10-minute Amiga Retro Cast here. Actually, you know what, Stephen? Who's our guest today? Who is our guest today?
Douglas Compton. Now, it's not Compton as in the hood or anything like that, but Doug is basically a figure in the Amiga community, in the Commodore community. So welcome, Doug, from the 10
Hello.
Amiga Retrocast.
Welcome.
So,
Now, there's no surprise that Stephen and I are huge Amiga people. I mean, my first 500 I got, I want to say in 1989. I got my first 500. Then you get the fever, and I got a couple 2000s, and bought a 1200. But then Amiga completely screwed the pooch, and I was so ticked off, I got rid of all my stuff. But I've been slowly building my stuff back up, and I've always been a fan of the Amiga. And Stephen, obviously, as well, he's messing with the Pi Storm as we speak, as a matter of fact.
yeah, they just got this damn thing working, so it's all good. But our guest not only does Amiga coverage in his channel, it's Commodore in general, I believe, right, Doug? Tell us a little bit about the channel, like where did you start, and maybe what it's all about for the folks that are just joining us. I know that Frank, he just said his resolution is 640 by 480, not a New Year's resolution. But hey, I'm not judging Frank here. So he was a guest. He's a bit of royalty around here. So but tell us a little bit how this all started for you, and like don't go to the beginning where you were in diapers kind of thing, but at least.
Mhm.
Where you went, oh man, this Amiga thing is awesome, or this Commodore thing's awesome,
It all started a long, long time ago when I was but a wee lad. Okay, I won't go that far back. But as far as the Commodore, just briefly, VIC-20 in late '81, early '82. I saw it at a some type of fair. It was a county fair, and they were playing Amok, AMOK, which is the Berserk clone on the VIC-20. Absolutely thought, okay, that's the computer for me. Yep.
Cool.
So VIC-20, Commodore 64 in probably late '84, early '85. Loved it to pieces. We can talk about that as much as you want. But when I heard about the Amiga, it was, before the announcement or before it was released, I'd heard about this Amiga, and I'm doing research, and I'm thinking, man, that is one incredible, incredible machine, and beautiful, but totally unaffordable. I was, 15 years old when it was announced. Didn't start working until I was 16.
Yeah, all of us were young at that time too. It's like,
well, I'm still. I don't know about you guys. But in '87, I when they announced the Amiga 500 and it was just $500-600, I thought, okay, here we go. Saved up my pennies. In early '88, I picked up an Amiga 500, extra 512K of RAM, and a gorgeous 1084 monitor and an extra floppy drive, and just absolutely fell in love with the Amiga.
How
just
much?
Everything about it.
How much of that set you back in 80s money?
Oh, I probably dropped about $800, $850, maybe $900 on it, which wasn't horrible. I'd literally saved up my money for like
jobs.
6 months. Mm-hmm. Oh no, I was working
cool.
full time, going to high school and still working about 30 hours a week.
Wow.
Yeah, but just throughout high school, middle school and high school, I'd always been heavily involved in computers. So I'd used Apples, I'd used IBMs, I'd used Commodore 64s. And the Amiga was just so far ahead of all of them, even so far beyond my beloved Commodore 64. I just instantly became a fan and just evangelized it to everybody. I'm from Rockford, Illinois, which is, not horribly far from the border up there. Just Wisconsin is
how far is it from Chicago?
90 miles.
It's not bad.
No, 90 miles.
I have a friend of mine also that lives about an hour out of.
He's got a
Chicago.
friend. It's true.
I have a friend. I have more
I've
than
seen
really.
It's a miracle.
Nice.
It's a baby business miracle.
But people talk about in the United States the Amiga wasn't popular. The Amiga wasn't this. Heck, Rockford, Illinois, 140,000 people. Within 30-minute drive, I had 5 or 6 places that sold Amiga hardware and probably 8 that sold Amiga software. There was no
shortage
limitation.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, but I think from a programming standpoint, the European market was much bigger as far as entertainment went. We had New Tech over here, which was a video toaster, which was huge, with Great Valley Products, GVP, and a lot of like micro people making small boards. But you can't deny that England and Europe with the bigger software developers. So with the PAL Amigas, because Amigas came in 2 flavors. You had your NTSC and PAL. The Amiga drove its architecture over NTSC and PAL. And that's why it was so well integrated for desktop video, TV production. But that was also a problem because if you took a PAL game, brought it over to the States, it ran a little bit on the slow side. And of course, if there was any NTS game you wanted in PAL, same problem.
It'd start rolling the screen because you can see it. And,
Correct.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is NTSC ran everything correctly as it's supposed to run, and PAL ran it incorrectly. But
what was the guest we had? It's how Jesus intended. That's one of our guests said something like that. Jesus intended it to be that way. But we got Goofyfoot in the chat that says, I miss my Amiga 500, sold it for a Macintosh. Disappointment.
It's a shame, when a lot of people, people in here, we're doing a poll, now 64% so far have used an Amiga. But the Amiga, its architecture, its bloodline is actually from Atari. The engineers who developed this machine, the Atari 400, the Atari 800, the 5200 gaming system are the grandparents of the Amiga architecture. That was the legacy of the machine. Maybe we'll do a whole show one day and add that whole thing. But long story short, Commodore eventually purchased the architecture. And when it came out in 1985, the Macintosh Plus was out around the same time frame, but the Amiga was color, where the Macintosh was not. The Amiga had a preemptive multitasking system, which the Macintosh and PC sure as hell did not. It had 4,096 available colors. Of course, that was in a special ham mode. But if you were drawing, even with the 32 colors or 64 with half bright, which came later on the enhanced chipset, the video capabilities was just amazing. But I think the Amiga really took off really with the video toaster and NewTek. It was really these small companies making hardware because Commodore didn't know what they had. They just bought it to make sure that Jack Tramiel at Atari didn't get it. They bought it, and it was a sub company. But it kills me that the Amiga is not only not around today as it should be. It should be pretty much running today's world, because I know Macintosh, they said multimedia. They coined the phrase multimedia. But the only machine that could do it was the Amiga. It sure as hell wasn't the Apple. And they just and like you were saying a second ago, they just let it stagnate. They sat on it for too long with the original chipset. But the original chipset was still so advanced, it took them 7, 8, 10 years to catch up. Would you agree?
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't until even when VGA came out, in the mid 80s, there were things it could do that the Amiga chipset couldn't do, display 256 colors at once. But actual VGA couldn't animate like the Amiga, not even close. Try to have 2 different screens on a VGA card with 2 different resolutions and 2 different amounts of colors display at the same time. Amiga could do it since 85. PC still can't do it.
On the screen, on the little Amiga 1000 here, I'm showing an animation from Eric Schwartz. Eric Schwartz made these animations. This is more or less on a stock Amiga. If you had a stock Amiga, which, 256, 512K RAM, it was pretty much what you would get. But your chipset, and I have the sound turned off right now, but maybe I can turn on the sound here for a second so people can hear it. This was coming on a plain vanilla machine. This was 1985 technology. You were not going to see this on a Mac. You were not going to see this on a PC. You're not going to see it on a Sinclair. None of these machines. But the sound was 8-bit, but it was, sampling. It was much more advanced than what you had with like a Yamaha chipset. But I'm going to turn that sound off so we can talk some more. But if you look on YouTube on Eric Schwartz or Amy Walk in the Park, you can hear the soundtrack for it. But what kept you in this so long? I mean, I know Amiga Bill. I've known Amiga Bill a long time, and Dan Wood. I know all these guys and Dave Presence we had on a week or two ago. What kept you so involved with the Amiga and doing this 10-minute Amiga, retro podcast?
Well, let me tell you how it started. I kept up with the Amiga for years after they collapsed, until my Amiga 3000 finally gave up the ghost in probably about 1997 or 1998. And that's about the time I started, kind of fading a little bit from really, really using my Amiga a lot, because at that time I only had an Amiga 500. Starting in the early 2000s, I was one of the people that bought one of the last batches of the SKool Amiga 1200s. Okay. I got it from Amiga Kit. And it was probably 2001, 2002. I bought one of the last new in-box Amiga 1200s from their old stock. Used it for a while, but then I got in this habit. I'd take out my Amigas. I'd use them for a week, 2 weeks, play with them, have fun, think, oh, great. And then I would put them away in the closet or in the storage unit, and I wouldn't touch them for a year or 2 years. I'd still kind of follow the websites a little bit, see what was going on in the community, but I wasn't big into it. And I did this from about 2002 until about 2017. I kept pulling them out, playing, putting them back. And I thought, Doug, you love the Amiga so much. It's so important to you. The only way you're going to make it part of your life again and something that you use on a regular basis is if you do something productive with it. So I put on my thinking cap and I thought, I've been watching Amiga Bill on a little bit, his shows on YouTube. I'd been watching some of the Dan Wood's videos, and then Retro Man Cave, good old Neil. He had that Trash to Treasure Amiga 500 episode that I watched like 3 times. And that's really what had his channel take off. And I thought, that's what I'll do. I'll make a YouTube show, but I'll be different in that all of my shows will be exactly 10 minutes or shorter. That was my goal from the beginning. So
How did you stick with that?
I didn't.
I was going to say it, but he said it first.
Nope.
I'm
nope.
just asking. I'm not judging.
Nope.
I'm just
The
asking.
first 6 months, 9 minutes, 12 minutes. And then I started realizing, Douglas, you have so much you want to talk about, so much you want to share. And people started asking questions. So I wanted to get more in depth with the hardware I'd review, more in depth with the software I'd review. So I started breaking them into 2 parts. I'd have part 1 of an episode and 12 minutes long. Part 2 would be 11 minutes long. But what I noticed is part 1 would get a bunch of views. Part 2, a third as many views. So I'm like, that's not working. So I decided, forget it. I'm going to talk until I'm done talking. So that's pretty much what I did. And they started creeping up 15 minutes, 18 minutes, 22 minutes, 25. Now my average is about 25 to 28 minutes. Although I've got some that last a good 45 minutes. And so 10-minute Amiga Retrocast has turned out to be just kind of a joke. We laugh about it. Me and my friends, we laugh about it. And when my good friend Kevin Saunders created this nice logo for me, you'll see
Plus.
sarcastically
I see the
10+ minute Amiga Retrocast.
Well, you're
Let's see if we got it. We got it here. Hold on. Pull up. Here we go. There we
I
go.
saw the plus there, and I'm like, oh,
Boom.
okay, he's got the plus.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that was his little dig at me.
That's funny. That's hilarious. But I saw
And
that
so-
because you were moving your head, and I was like, hey, there's a little plus back there.
Yep. Yep.
So that
And-
was pretty
It
cool.
was better than squared. That'd have been better.
Yep.
So
And literally every week, every 2 weeks, I still get messages from new subscribers that say, gee, your 10-minute retrocast was 40 minutes long. And I explained it to them. I said, yeah, we just have fun with it now.
It's a
We
running
laugh
joke
about
at
it.
this stage, I guess.
Yeah.
real quick, we did get a super chat from this guy named Frank. I don't know if anyone knows Frank.
Never heard of him.
I
Never
don't
heard
think
of
so.
him.
Mhm.
So Frank, thank you
Yeah.
very much. It's really necessary. But I got to call him and contact him because I do want to send him my 1200 and a couple of things I want him to have to take a look at. We had him on 2 weeks ago. Was it 2 weeks ago, Stephen?
Just before Christmas, yeah.
Just before
the
Christmas.
23rd, 24th.
Yep.
somewhere
And if you have stuff you need troubleshoot with your Amiga, or looking for stuff for your Amiga or Commodore stuff, he's got a really great website.
and Coco too, apparently.
And that's right, and Coco too. So it seems like a
Everybody
very,
likes
very.
those machines.
I know he was saying he wasn't a very nice guy, but I think he was a nice guy. So
Frank
Yeah,
is
he-
incredible.
Yeah.
He's helped me on a couple of projects. He's recapped a couple of my machines. Just last night, I was using his modem that plugs into the Commodore 64 that lets you connect your Commodore 64 to Wi-Fi, and then it works just like an old school modem at 9600 baud. So I'm on a bulletin board system on my Commodore 64 from 1985 at 9600 baud with Frank's modem. Worked absolutely
The
flawlessly.
wind had to be blowing in the right direction and everything for that to work at that rate.
It's
Wow.
awesome. He's got some great products, and I have a stack of stuff to send him. Frank, you remember when I told you I had my Atari 5200 and 7800 I need to send to you? Yeah, I still need to send
what are
that
you
to
doing with those two? You guys modding them or repairs?
Well, I tried last year and a half ago, to install a composite mod into my Atari 2600.
Yep.
And I did a very bad job of it, and I killed my Atari 2600 in doing so.
Oh,
And I don't want to risk that on my 5200 or Atari 7200 or 7800. I don't want to risk blowing the thing up. So I'm like, okay. you
Yeah,
take it,
out
Frank.
of all three of those, the 2600 is the most robust. The 1700 is really finicky, especially
Mhm.
with if you're doing the composite out or something along those lines, because it supports the 2600 and 1700.
this
you have to
boat
get the
anchor.
Kind of right. Oh, you
You
can't
can
quite see
kinda
it.
see it with the green screen.
There we go. Yeah,
Well, the green
2600.
screen,
This is 2600.
the Woody six.
It's a
six
Woody.
Switch,
Yep.
Six
Yep.
switch. It's not a heavy sixer, but it's a light sixer, I guess.
So since you've had what has been just not necessarily the best chipset or the most advanced, what was your favorite Amiga and why? Doesn't have to be the most robust, but what was your favorite of the line?
Without a doubt, the Amiga 3000. Absolutely love it. It's beautiful, just like the Amiga 1000. It's a beautiful piece of hardware. It had every feature that you could want in an Amiga in 1991. I wish it would have came out like 89, but the fast SCSI, the RAM expansion, 32-bit access to the ROMs for the most part, 32-bit access to chip RAM for the most part, with some caveats. What a fantastic machine!
A built-in flicker fixer too.
Built-in flicker fixer.
SCSI.
Use a standard VGA monitor.
Yeah,
SCSI was built in.
And I mentioned my Amiga 3000 died in about 1997, and I spent a couple of months trying to troubleshoot it, trying to fix it. I think just was gone. So I put it away and didn't even take it out of my storage room until 2019, when I brought it in and I started fiddling around with it. Couldn't get it working.
Still can't get it working to this day.
Oh, no. Here's the rest of the story. I ended up getting another Amiga 3000, a towerized one, not the tower version, but one somebody put in a tower back in about 2006. I got it with a bunch of other stuff. So I took that motherboard, put it in my case. It was working beautiful. Accidentally killed that Amiga 3000.
Oh, no.
I had a 68040 accelerator in there. All right. And I did a show on it. It was a show on my PC bridge board that you could stick in there.
Yep.
Then I walked out of my office and I went ahead on with my life. And for 5 days, my Amiga 3000 was sitting on in my studio with a 68040 card in there.
Overheated it.
And it totally cooked it. Absolutely.
Oh, man.
Because those things get so hot. And, it was in the summer, so it got hot in my office. I literally just forgot to turn my Amiga 3000 off and killed it. So I sent that board to Chucky Hertel, John Hertel in Sweden, I think. And he put it in one of those Amiga boards. That's one of those Amiga 3000 boards that he redesigned. Yep. And you take all the chips, you put it in there. And so while that was gone, while that Amiga 3000 was gone, I thought, I'm going to pull my old 3000 from 97 out. Just take one more look at it, just for laughs. I get it out and I'm fiddling with it. Turns out all that was wrong with it for all those almost 20 years was the ROMs had died. And I had never thought in those 20 years when it was sitting in storage just to get a new set of ROMs, plug them in. I put a new set of ROMs in, the thing booted up in 2 seconds flat. I could have had that thing for the last 20 years working if I just would have thought about it. But,
well, that's a very weird
one of those
thing
feel
to go.
good life moments.
It is. But the ROM chips going bad is because I'm assuming those were Commodore original chips, right?
Yeah,
that is a little bit on the outside.
2.1.
Were they bad? Were they maybe they corroded a little bit? You try cleaning them?
They just died. They just died. And back in 97, I wasn't thinking, maybe I'll order the 3.1 ROMs from Amiga Kit back then or whatever and try a new set of ROMs. I didn't even think about it.
A ROM is not something that'll usually die either.
Right. That's very odd.
Like it's not something like a CPU overheating or CIA chip or whatever dying. Yeah, sure. But ROM chip? That's unusual. Oh, by the way, Doug wrote earlier, he said, not Doug, Frank, sorry. He said Doug should not be playing with the soldering iron.
Yeah, right there. Boom.
Yes.
I just saw that and I went, maybe he has a point there, but you never know, right?
Frank wants to take away all my soldering equipment and lock it away. And if I even mention soldering, he wants to just slap my hand and say, no.
Well, I mean, I've seen some soldering jobs that were some complete butchers. I had purchased off of eBay an old Fairchannel Channel F version 2. I don't know what the hell I think they crazy glued and just like blah.
Blowtorch?
Well, yeah, it was a mess. It took me a couple of days to fix it. I got it working. But some people really, should not be touching soldering irons.
It's a finesse thing. It's usually a little finesse. And
less is more with soldering irons. It's really less is more.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So let's change gears here a little bit. Mm-hmm. I want to change gears with Doug. So we're gonna talk about stuff more Doug on not a personal level, because personal is personal, but back in the 80s, what kind of movies did you like and stuff like that? Like, meaning because the Amiga's part of that era, if you will. The 90s, late 80s, that sort of thing. Give us a few movies that really, I don't know if you're a movie watcher. I shouldn't assume everybody that comes on here watches movies, but is there movies that spark your imagination or you'll play? It's your go-to movie. I'm not talking Christmas movies because those are limited, but what are your go-to movies? Was it like science fiction or not? Or Have at it.
Mary Poppins. It's the only movie I watched all throughout the 80s was Mary Poppins.
Mary
No,
Poppins.
not really. Not really.
You should have a crickets sound, awkward pause.
Actually, you know what? I didn't even think about that because he got me totally off guard, but I could have got that. Here we go.
There you go.
Actually, I do love Mary Poppins, but that's a whole nother story. No, I was 100% science fiction and fantasy guy back then. I could not get enough of Star Wars, and as soon as that came out on VHS in the mid to late 80s, and every time it would come on HBO, I would watch it just over and over and over again. I couldn't even tell you how much I watched that.
Did you catch HBO when it was played every single time for a straight month? Like they played Star Wars and it would say up next Star Wars, and they play Star Wars and up
Probably.
next Star Wars, and it did it for an entire month, nothing but Star Wars.
That's crazy.
Yep.
You guys had that,
yeah,
like a marathon of Star Wars?
That was on
here
HBO
in
when it first came out.
HBO would do stuff like that now
Yep.
and again. Yeah.
I mean,
We didn't have HBO here in Canada.
I'm talking nothing else. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a full month. The original Star Wars that was first released. That's all they played. And you know what? Everyone was watching it all day.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
And
we got
another one I love.
chat from
Go ahead.
Hobby
Read it
Hands
up.
there.
Read it up.
Amiga 500 was a big part of my teens. We made a 31-minute Trek show with the sets and costumes, and you used my Genlock to add phasers and beam up and basic 2D animated ships from Hobby Hands. That's pretty cool. On a 500.
We want to see that.
Yeah, that's. I mean,
If
that's.
you give me
you
a copy of
still
that, I'll
have
put it
it.
on my channel.
Yeah, you got to dig that up.
Well, the
You
thing
can't
is,
have
the
lost
Amiga
that.
did have. You could just do Genlock, and you didn't have. I mean, before the Video Toaster came out, you had a Genlock. I had a very basic one. It just overlaid the Amiga graphics. It didn't have any sliders. You could spend a little more money and get the sliders, wiping effects. That was. I remember a lot of people. I worked at Radio Shack at that time. People would walk in. They bought Amigas. They were doing like the wedding videos. People not starting up with that. They bought an Amiga and they were using that for the titles and effects. But that was way before the toaster. But then the toaster came out, and then they really
Took it another notch higher, and especially with Lightwave, that took it again for CGI.
Lightwave, Babylon 5.
Babylon
right there.
5. The list goes on and on. Sequest. I think even Star Trek Voyager had some, and Next Generation had some.
It was
some
always
stuff,
funny.
so-
You know what's funny about that? When it did get onto like Voyager, the Mac, every community, like your Atari community, and Atari's better, Amiga, IBM, and Mac. They all said that. And then you're like, haha, we got the toaster on the Mac, so we don't need to buy an Amiga. Like, no, you morons. You're buying an Amiga 2000 that connects serially to your Mac. It's still an Amiga you need.
Yep.
That's the thing, right? So there must have been not more movies than just Star Wars. I mean, let's veer to the left and right here as far as.
The other one I loved was Krull. If you guys remember Krull, where they had
Glenn
that,
remembers Krull.
I brought that up not too long ago.
Blade weapon, I think it was the glaive.
Yep.
I couldn't tell you how many times I watched that. And I have an admission to make. There's been one time in my life that I went to a movie theater and paid for the movie and then stayed in the theater and snuck back in to watch it again. And that was Krull back in the mid-'80s. And that is the only time in my life I've ever snuck back into a movie theater.
We got a criminal on our hands here. What's up with that?
Yep.
Get the cuffs on.
Book them, Dano.
I think we all did stupid stuff like that, but it's for a good cause. It's for science fiction cause. That's what it is.
Yeah,
that's really cool. Krull it's a unique film.
It is. It was a film that was supposed to be huge, and it just didn't do well in the theaters. But its hope was that it was going to.
But it's a cult classic now. And have you ever played the Atari 2600 Krull game?
Actually, I have.
That's actually,
but I'm old.
Really, really good. That is amazingly.
It really?
It's amazingly in depth for an Atari 2600 game. It's got like 4 or 5 different screens. You're doing different stuff. I enjoy that.
Unlike E.T.
E.T. was a beautiful game. It was really, really.
It was made in record time, apparently.
Gameplay.
Yeah, actually, from concept to in box is on shelves 6 weeks, which is unheard of. And one programmer, Howard Washer. That was it.
Yep.
No one else.
That's sad. No wonder it failed.
Well, I think again, comparably, I would take that a million times over the Pac-Man port. So it's all in perspective.
I played the Pac-Man,
You know,
but not that well.
I enjoyed Pac-Man even back in the day. My friend Bo, who lived down the street from me, he got Pac-Man. Yeah, he got Pac-Man on release day, and I wanted to play it so bad. And here I'm 12 years old, 13 years old. I gave him 3 Susan B. Anthony dollars as a special dollar that was out in the early
Yep,
80s.
I remember. I got a
I
couple
gave
of
him
those.
my 3 Susan B. Anthony dollars to borrow it for one night. And I stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning playing
Wow.
Pac-Man. And, and I was used to the Atari 2600. It wasn't exactly like the arcade games, and I
Right.
never expected it to
Like
be.
about this
But
close.
it was still fun. Mhm.
So
But
now,
it was still fun.
and talking about that, then before the Amiga, when you were growing up, what did you play? Was it basically the Atari? Is that what you had, or you had something television? What did you have back in the
Yeah,
day?
we started out with a Sears Telegame, which was one of the black consoles that
Yep.
has the light gun, and it's got a couple paddles, and it was a Pong game and
Yep.
a target shooting game. And that was cool. We had that for about 6-7 months. Then my dad, for Christmas, got us an Atari 2600, which I still have my original one. It was a Woody. I'm sorry, it wasn't an Atari. It was the Sears
Video
version.
Yep, Sears
Yeah,
Video-Cade.
Yeah, it was the Sears version because he worked at Sears, so he even got a discount on it. And I played the daylights out of that. We had a color TV upstairs, probably a nice 13-inch, maybe a 14-inch color TV, just
color?
perfect. Oh yeah, it was great. And
You must
for
have been rich.
for years, my dad called me the Atari Kid. Hey, it's the Atari Kid, because I'd come home after school and I'd play some Atari. I'd stay up till 11 at night. I'd play some Atari. Absolutely loved it until I got my Commodore 64 and my VIC-20.
So that's where
Then
you went
it,
afterwards? You went from the 2600 to the Commodore 64?
I went
Oh, yeah.
Atari 2600, VIC-20 to the Commodore 64.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Mhm.
I didn't have a VIC-20. I went from ColecoVision to Commodore 64.
ColecoVision was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Me and Glenn are ColecoVision fans.
We are. It's a
Mhm.
shame because the North American gaming crash happened, and the ColecoVision, the Vectrex, which are 2 phenomenal systems, didn't
Mhm.
really get a chance to shine. They had a good first
Mhm.
generation, and well, the Vectrex had a first generation. The ColecoVision kind of had 1 and second generation games, but it had a lot of life left in it, and it just fell short.
Yeah, that's sad.
You know what? What I actually liked to play on the ColecoVision, I actually liked that darn Smurfs game. Buddy of mine named Randy had a ColecoVision, and Smurfs was one of the one he had. And I wasn't a fan of the Smurfs back then.
It's a
but
cool game.
That was a pretty darn good game, and it was
Here.
beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
I'm going to show you guys something.
Great animation it had on a game. It was just so different.
Uh-huh. It was, hey, there we go.
It's got the box.
Invisible
Stupid
box.
thing. Yeah, it's the background. There we go. Anyways, you guys get it. It
was frustrating that the Smurf would die if you touched a blade of grass or a fence or something like that. Was silly, but the gameplay was actually pretty good, and it was a beautiful.
I like
game.
the way he died. It would just be bunk right on the ground.
Mhm.
No
Yeah.
animation in between. It was just standing up and he's dead all of a sudden. No, nothing in between for sure. Well, that's pretty cool.
Mhm.
The ColecoVision was really cool for sure.
But then, after I got my Commodore 64, I didn't care a fig about any console.
Me neither.
I'd heard of the Atari 5200 and the 7800. Yeah, that's fine, whatever. Nintendo Entertainment System, whatever. I had one friend that had it, didn't care a bit. And I completely ignored every single console until the Wii came out in 2006. And I started watching some commercials on the Wii and watching some videos on the Wii. I'm like, wow, that's actually pretty cool. And that's what actually got me back into consoles, of which I own an absolute ton of them now.
I did a similar transaction. I went to the Xbox, in the original Xbox, not the GameCube, but the original Xbox. And I did the same thing. Had my Amiga and the Commodore 64. And why would you want to play a console? And, we did some illegal activity back in the day as children of, copying the damn things, go to jail at 15 years old. But when you think about it, you're 15 years old. these Coleco games or 2600 games were, $40 to $60 a pop almost.
Right.
And here you were on the 64 going, I got to just buy a box of floppies.
Yeah. Talk to a couple of my friends.
Yeah, exactly. They come over, have a little pop and chip party and copy some games, and that was it, and you had games that were better than the NES almost, or the Sega Master System or the, I mean, you had all these games that were, if not better or equal, so.
Yep.
You had to deal with load times. You still had to deal with the load times.
Yeah, but that's the thing, though. That was the cool part. But Glenn had a TI 99, right? You had
I did. So originally, I wanted to buy an Atari 400. Like I was working at a video store, and they had the 4800, and I wanted the 400. Now, this was 79, so I was I was 10 years old at the time, and I did not realize that if you bought a TI, it couldn't run computer games for an Atari or vice versa. I just thought it was a computer. You can load the games. I want this thing's silver. It's black. It looks really cool. It's got a real keyboard versus the chip keyboard. So I bought a TI 994A for I think it was like $700 at Crazy Eddie. And I got home and I made copies of a bunch of Atari tapes and I put it in my cassette player and it didn't do anything. And I had no idea. It was very frustrating. And I found, oh, geez, it doesn't work. Yeah. So I was a little disappointed.
Lesson learned.
Lesson learned. The TI had some good stuff on it. And actually, I told Steven, and it's true, that the architecture of the TI 994A was the grandfather of the ColecoVision. The video chip, the sound chip, the memory architecture, the VRAM, all that came from the TI. The only thing it didn't do was take the TMS processor and it went with a Z-Log processor in there, which is actually funny because even though the TI was the first 16-bit microcomputer in the market, they put so much glue logic to make it work with the rest of the architecture that it was the slowest machine on the planet. They did it. There was a guy, I don't know his name. He took like a Coco, a VIC-20, even a Timex Clay 1000, wrote a little basic program, and the TI came dead last by far, even behind the Sinclair 1000, which was a slow machine. But its video capabilities were really good. So that's where the ColecoVision came from. But yeah, lesson learned. And eventually I did get a 400. I also bought an Atari XE game system, which is basically an Atari 400. And then the 5200, which was funny. The 5200 came out after the 400 and 800, even though that kit was designed first.
Yeah.
Just that computers were taken off. So, let's put a keyboard on there. We'll send that out. And the architecture for that 8-bit line went for a very long time. It was still going up against
early
the Amiga.
90s.
Yeah, it was going up against the Amiga and everything else. It was still selling in small markets, but that chipset, like I said, became the Amiga chipset. And it's just a shame that Jay Miner and R.J. Mitchell and all those other guys who worked so hard on making a machine that was a machine that they wanted. It just happened to be so advanced. No one knew what to do with it back then. It was so advanced. No one knew. And that, I think, was partially the bad thing. I actually think if Atari had gotten it instead of Commodore, I think it might have gotten better because Atari was very good with the ST upgrades. They were constantly they added a blitter. They added this. They were constantly adding stuff to the line, even though it was not as good as the Amiga.
No,
I'm agreeing. The Amiga was still better. I'm just saying that.
I wish I had more thumbs.
I think Atari would have put more effort into marketing it than Commodore did. I think Atari would have done more to constantly upgrade the chipset than Commodore did. That's all I mean by that. Commodore didn't really do anything.
Commodore couldn't manage money.
We had Dave Presidents on. He basically said the marketing guys and sales guys were embezzling so much money. There's no money to go to the engineers.
Didn't he talk about a brothel or something?
Yeah.
Island or something? It was like, really? Wow. That's where the money went, to brothels? Like, what the hell?
So I know.
What's your Amiga collection?
Wait, before we go to that, he's obviously not an Atari fan, but why aren't you an Atari fan?
God, what makes you say that?
Yeah, he needs more thumbs to go down.
Atari. I am 100% an Atari fan.
Okay.
I own 2600, 5200, 7800. I play them all the time, weekly at least. I'm on one of those. Atari 800 XL, absolutely love it. I was playing Demon Attack on it the other day. Just 2 days ago, I probably spent about 2 hours playing on my Atari 800 XL. Love it. Atari ST, hot garbage. I'm sorry. Now, hear me out. It's better than a Macintosh of the same generation. If you were to say, hey, you want to do a Mac Black and White or an Atari 520 ST? Oh, 520 ST any day of the week. It's a better computer in almost every way. But it was so crippled in that it did not have the hardware scrolling. It did not have decent sprites, if any sprites at all. Its audio chip was the same one that the ZX Spectrum used. It was just crippled. I own an Atari ST 1040, and I spent probably 2 months trying to find a single game that I enjoyed playing on there.
Nothing.
Try playing Millipede on an Atari 1040 ST, and then go and play it on your 800 XL or even on your Atari 2600. You'll find a better game on the 8-bits than we're on the ST.
What's that expression go? You can put lipstick on a pig. In the end, it's still a pig or whatever. You know, same idea, I guess. I don't know.
Now, for productivity, it was
a beta fan right here. Goofy Foot. He thinks you're all right.
That for productivity, it had a beautiful grayscale productivity mode that displayed on a VGA monitor. That was lovely on the ST. And desktop publishing, fantastic on there. Had some great laser printers available for it. Fantastic for music if you're into
the
MIDI.
interface on that thing.
Yeah, but
the interface is terrible.
But for games, I'm sorry.
It's not the same.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
And I'm not just saying this because I like the Amiga games better, and I do. Amiga was fantastic for games. But I like my Commodore 64 and Atari 800 XL games better than the ones on the ST. Sorry.
No need to apologize.
None. I don't own an ST. Never did. But I know it was more inexpensive at the time. And it was very popular in the beginning because the Amiga was. I can say the Amiga was incredibly more expensive, but it was more expensive than the ST. And the ST was developed in like 9 or 10 months, where the Amiga was developed over multiple years. So I think for what it was, I think it was pretty good. But Atari, like I said, they noticed, we need the Amiga's got a blitter. We got to get a blitter in there. We got to do this. They were adding stuff to it where, again, Commodore should have been doing the same thing. If Commodore did little incremental things like that, I truly believe it would have taken off more than it did. I truly believe we'd have the Amiga here, especially when Apple in like 97 was doing so bad. The Amiga at that point, I think would have been strong enough where that would have now taken its place.
Yeah,
sure.
AGA chipset, it was actually a decent chipset if it came out in, say, 1989.
Correct.
It would have been an incredible chipset, beat the pants off of everything. And then by about 92 or 93, they should have had the like Ombre chipset.
The AAA Ombre.
The AAA.
Or the Amiga Ranger, which was a machine that Jay Minor, or Minter, I never say it right. That's where the architecture was phenomenal, but the memory chips for it would have been just so expensive, you couldn't do it.
Yeah, Amiga could have become what NVIDIA is now, or what AMD could have been if they continued making good video cards. They were kind of thinking on going the video card direction, where you could actually get a card to plug into your PC, into a PCI slot, and it would be a really, really powerful video card that also could run Amiga software and still be right in your PC. And if they could have gone ahead with that plan, I truly think they could have been a big contender.
Like a 3DO Blaster. When the 3DO came out, they made the Blaster card, which went inside a PC, and you can. It wasn't really a video card for the PC, but you can run 3DO technology on a PC. But the high speed 2x CD-ROM, incredible.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve, I'm sorry. I interrupted Steven before. I'm sorry. What was it you were going to say?
I forgot. I'm old. I don't know what the hell I was talking about.
You're saved.
I do.
Damn it.
So how many Amigas do you have? This is where we dig up the hoarding part of our show.
Yeah. Three Amiga 500s. One of them's in Stephen Jones' Checkmate case, which is absolutely fantastic.
That is a nice case. I don't have one, but it's a nice case.
It's beautiful. An Amiga 1000, which is my baby. I picked that up at Amy West a couple of years ago, and she's got a vampire in her now, and she is just a beautiful little machine. Just love it. Sitting right over there. So I've got that. Amiga 2000s, I have 2 of them. At one point, I had, I think, three. Yeah, I had three, but I sold one a couple of years ago. Two Amiga 1000s. One of them has my video toaster in it, which works just beautifully. I just did a show using that one last week. Let's see, Amiga 3000s, two of those, and Amiga 4000s. I've got one complete Amiga 4000 and then a spare motherboard that came out of another towerized case. So in theory, I could put it back in that case and make another Amiga 4000, but they're too big. Amiga 1200, which is my baby. She's kind of like my daily driver, the one I use if I want to play a game or something like that. My Amiga 1200, love it. And then my good friend Sanxion from, you guys maybe know him, Tim Drew from Pixel Gaiden podcast. He gave me a really good deal on a PAL Amiga 600 about a year and a half ago. That's just a beautiful little machine. Here she is. I don't think she's plugged into anything, so I can pick it up. Oh, yeah. Look at that little Amiga 600.
Got a nice little Gotek in there?
Yeah, yeah. And I hated these back in the day. Hated them. They were the dumbest machine to come out with in 91 or 92 because they were barely more than an Amiga 500, and they cost just as much, and they couldn't use the expansion purpose.
There was supposed to be a 300, and the original ones had 300 on the board. There was supposed to be a more inexpensive entry level, and they said, you know what? No, let's make it. We'll call it 600 and charge more.
Yeah, yeah. And if they would have done it as an Amiga 300, as a maybe $150 or $200 Amiga, I think it would have been fantastic. But no, But today, these things are absolutely perfect because look how tiny that little thing is. It just fits right in your hand. You can get some. I disappeared.
You did.
Some really nice expansions for it, and I love the little thing now. But yeah, back in the day, they were silly.
You wondered why it existed. That's what when I was back when it was back then, I was like, I have a 500. Why would I want this thing? Yep. It didn't have the AJA chipset because it was released alongside of those, right? So
yeah, it's like 6 months before the 1200. Yeah.
So what about CD32? Do you have a CD32?
That is the only actual regular Amiga that I do not own is a CD32. I got my CD-TV.
Oh, you have a CD-TV? Okay.
Oh, I love that. That thing is so beautiful. I've expanded the daylights out of it.
I think it's cool. I think it's just a cool VCR looking thing. You know what I mean? Like a fancy CD player.
It's got the 90s written all over it.
Oh, yeah. It's literally something you put in a stereo cabinet and it blends in, kind of thing. It doesn't stick out like a computer in a sense. And I think that was pretty cool. The 1200, not 1200, but the CD32, I've got one of those and it runs all that software, thankfully.
I got to admit, though, the CD32 is ugly as sin.
It is. It's a terrible looking.
I like it.
It's a bad design, in my opinion, visually. It's an eyesore.
They tried to mimic the Sega Genesis, with the dome on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the CD-TV looked like a beautiful piece of stereo equipment, like from Pioneer or something like that.
Yeah,
it came out to 32. It was like, just didn't like it.
They should have rounded off a few corners and stuff. It's too tanky looking. It's not a beautiful machine, but you have to admit that thing's a 1200 in there, and they shrunk that board down. They took out PCMCIA slot, get rid of that. Expansion, get rid of that, and put in the back,
but you could still was it SX or SVX? I forgot what it was called.
The expansion. SX something,
yeah. You could turn it back to full computer. So
you could put a keyboard, mouse.
You could put a terrible fire in that
RAM
thing.
in there. Oh, now you can expand it
nowadays. Nowadays, from what I understand, you could get a terrible fire 68060 to shove in there. Why? I don't know, because you can, I guess, but it's just like, okay, I'm not spending $400 on making this thing like as fast as a 4000 or whatever, so it's, they made some mistakes, Commodore, but hey, what's interesting is that the YouTube community is pretty vibrant in the whole Amiga scene. Like there's we've got Chris Edwards that does Amiga content.
Yeah, the Amigos, Boat and Aaron do the Amigo show every week.
Yeah, I've seen them. And Dan Wood, like Glenn mentioned earlier, the community is still holding on. It's amazing to me that the love is still there 30 years later. Like, like for a computer that it didn't, but it did for the people that knew that secret, we'll call it. You know what I mean? It was kind of like a little secret, us Amiga folks. knew that the PC and Mac guys were oblivious to, in a sense, because that's what it felt like back in the 90s. You know what I mean? So it's kind of cool. It's amazing to me that it's still going strong on YouTube.
I view it as more than just holding on. I mean, if you think about it, there's at least 10 stores across the world that are more or less dedicated to selling Amiga and often Commodore parts. You know, like Frank's here. There's
Retro
Amiga
Rewind,
yeah. There's RetroReady.1. There's Amiga Kit. There's Amiga Store.eu, Visalis.
It's amazing.
Retro Passion. And these people, I wouldn't say they're making a living doing it, but they made it into a viable business. And there's where that comes out absolutely all of the time. I mean,
that's the part that fascinates me the most. New tech, like what we're doing here, this Raspberry Pi and an Amiga that accelerates the thing to craziness speeds. And it's stuff that people just decided to tinker with and put it out there and change the Amiga world, if you will, right? So that's really cool.
Yeah. Just today, literally today, I got a card in from a guy in Europe, 512 megabyte Zorro 3 expansion for my Amiga 3000 or 4000. Pop it in there, 512 megs, just like that.
How much?
Brand new. This was around 170, I think.
That's not terrible.
From Jens at Individual Computers.
Right.
I just got in a Buddha controller, which is an IDE controller.
Mine's
brand new.
incoming.
Yep. I got a video adapter from my Amiga 4000 that's an MK3 video adapter that adds a bunch of new video modes, rock solid, flicker free. It's all brand new stuff. People are making it, selling it, and making a business out of it. It's phenomenal. And I know that other markets, other computers, same thing. You mentioned the Texas Instruments 99.4A. Yeah, you can get some cool new hardware for that. I've got an SD card reader for mine. I've got a TI-99 right next to me. But you don't find a dedicated store for it, much less 10 dedicated stores that mainly deal in Amiga
It's
stuff.
a guy on a forum that you got to talk to in a back alleyway, and you got to be wearing a red carnation on yourself to meet him and say the secret word. Yep. And if you miss the boat, it's gone forever. That's the reality of that stuff. It's like, hey, you're reading forum posts on these forums selling this stuff, and it's back to 2018, let's say. And it's like, oh, that'd be really cool. All sold out. Never see it again.
Yep, it happens. Like the ColecoVision, they made the I can't think of the name right. The but you replaced
F18A.
F8. Thank you, F18A, right? Which was a replacement video chip, which is phenomenal. It gives you VGA out of the ColecoVision. I put one of my TI because it's the same chip, and I put one of my ColecoVision, and stuff like that's really cool. FPJ, and Stephen and I have been going back and forth, and he kind of changed his mind a little bit. Because when you start talking about like the Amigas, like a Pi Storm, or or the not the Mr. Project, what's the other the Vampire? When does it stop becoming an Amiga? If you're not replacing your CPU,
that was actually my next question to Doug.
Okay, do it.
Yeah, no. Go ahead. It's basically that, Doug. Since all this hardware is coming out for the Amiga, Glenn and I have gone on for hours. Not arguing, just sort of discussing the whole, when does it stop being the Amiga in a sense? You put the Pi Storms in and the Vampires in. When does it just lose its identity a little bit? You know what I'm saying? What do you think about that? I want to hear your opinion on when does it become
something else?
Something else, another Frankenstein thing or whatever.
Yeah. And that's an excellent question. And people often look at things like the Vampire or the Pi Storm incorrectly. And they think, you put a Vampire in your computer, all you're using is the keyboard. Nope. It adds retargetable graphics, just like we could put in our Amiga 2000s and 3000s back in the late 80s and early 90s. That technology was available. Right. It adds a faster CPU. Heck, we could do that since 1986. It adds a hard drive interface. We could do that since 1985 or 86. And it still uses all of the original Amiga chips. I've got my Amiga 1000 5 feet away from me over here with a Vampire in it. I can boot it up, 16 million color, 1280 by 720 image, a fast hard drive. But you know how long it takes me to then click a button and boot it up into a 4-color ECS mode that's using all the chips on the motherboard and the Paula? It takes me 2 seconds. 100% still using all of the original Amiga hardware. So if it runs Amiga software, if it looks like an Amiga, if it acts like an Amiga, you're screen dragging and all these beautiful resolutions you can create, and still uses original Amiga resolutions and technologies, I think it's a real Amiga. Even things like Chris Edwards' Pi-Amiga, which runs on like the Pi 4 or the Raspberry
The
Pi
keyboard
400.
thing, right?
Yeah, I got one
It's
right
disappearing.
here.
Magic box.
There we go. Like this, it's a Raspberry Pi. Back in the day when you could actually, get these things, this was like $100, and it runs his Pi-Amiga software. It still oftentimes feels exactly like an Amiga because it run all my old Amiga software. And if I want it to be even more Amiga-like, I just run AmiBerry on it, and you can run it in ECS mode, OCS mode, AGA mode. Yeah, so I think as long as it feels like an Amiga, it is.
Yeah, that's the thing. I am impartial to it too. It's just you kind of question yourself sometimes when you add these upgrades. You're kind of like, am I sinning here, or am I going to hell in a speedboat, or am I going to get shunned by the community, or what's going to happen?
Well, it does happen. I mean, it does happen.
You get people ripping you a new one.
I personally found that the Amiga community is very tenuous. People are more passionate than any other community that I've ever been in. There are the pure purists, which will burn you to the stake for doing anything to your machine. Then the other people who, are more creative with their machines. They'll cut the case, they'll do things, and the other people flip out. And then they'll almost burn you at the stake for it.
As long as you're having fun with it, as long as you're enjoying it, there's nothing wrong with it. Expand the daylights out of it. I get just as much joy out of using my Amiga 500 with Workbench 1.3 that's sitting behind me. I have a blast using that and working within the limitations of that Amiga 500 as I do my Amiga 4000 with its 060 and retargetable graphics and big fancy hard drives.
Loaded.
Yeah, you just have fun in a different way. You just, do different things with them.
Good.
It's like saying, okay, when is a PC from the 90s not a PC anymore? If you add a graphics card, a sound card, a CD-ROM, does that mean it's not a PC? No, that's what it's designed for. It's designed to be upgraded.
It's still an expanded thing. Yeah, exactly. No, it's just that some people are polarized with that sort of thing. And I find, like Glenn and I have had these discussions on the phone and stuff like that.
I like how he says discussions. There were flat-out arguments.
We weren't yelling. We weren't
come to blows.
We were just sort of like, okay, how do we, where do you draw the line in the sand or not, or whatever? There is no line in the sand, possibly, right? So, no, it's a good discussion, and I think it should be open-ended because going back to the Commodore 64, even for that matter, it's really difficult to go from a PC to there, or the Amiga and transfer files. Doug and I, he helped me out. Thank you again. Transferring that stuff with this other device. But then there's that roadblock. And I think these new devices enable you to play new things on your old hardware with the help of a computer. So it needs that, we'll call it a crutch, essentially, to get stuff on there, so it's pretty good.
I got another question. I don't ask many people. I'm going to ask you because you're obviously a big Amiga person. When did you finally say to yourself, you know what? You still like the machine, but you got to move on. When did that happen for you?
That's an excellent question. And I was kind of forced into it in about
we all were.
94. Yeah, about 94. I started selling PCs at what's Office Max now. Before it had a different name. And then in 95, I went to work for a computer company selling PCs with Windows 3.1 on it. And I realized then, I really just need to get a PC. so I could really, really come to understand what was going on with them. I'd already picked up a 386 bridge board. I was using that in my Amiga 3000, but I got a real PC. It was a 486 with an Intel Blue Lightning processor in it. And it was nice. I could play Doom on it just fine. There was all kinds of cool games and things like that. But it didn't have the same feeling
It was a
as my
machine.
Amigas
It was,
did.
No, you're right.
It was just a
It didn't
piece
have
of
a
appliance.
soul.
Right.
And every PC that I've owned, and I like all my PCs, I still sell them for a living. I'm doing this on a i7 Lenovo that I sell Lenovos all the time. But if I took this laptop and threw it in the dumpster, if it broke or something like that, whatever, buy a new one. But you would not be able to drag my Amiga 1200 out of my hands if you wanted to take that away from me or something like that. No way. That thing it's important to me. It has emotions behind it. It has feelings behind it.
You'd cry if it died. You would cry.
Well, he
You'd
did.
light a candle at church.
I mean, he had a machine, had a 3000 dead for like 20 years. He did not get rid of it. It was a simple fix at the end. But most people, it's broken. Yeah, all right, it's gone. He held on. He held on that entire time.
Yep, I've never thrown away an Amiga. Never thrown away
Can't
an
throw
Amiga.
your girlfriends away.
Yeah, we're doing that stuff for sure. I guess we're out of time now, eh, Glenn?
We are running out of time. Yeah, we
so
went
much
through time.
We
But I want to
tend
do
to want to
something.
do that.
I want to do something real quick and special. We have some people still in the chat, so I want to show them my CES item because Glenn does have a local CES. So we're talking about this for about a year and a half. And the Build-A-Cade came out. So now move on to the next thing. So the Akari Warriors joystick, I finally got my first working machine here. So this will be a full joystick. You have your 8 directions on your joystick, right? You will have push and pull, but also this right now has, which one's this? This is the 8-way rotation top. And you can swap that out with a 12 rotation stop. So I'll do a video on this one. So if you want to play Potato Frontline the right way, or Akari Warriors or Tank, they require a joystick that has a position lock. GRS is finally coming out with it. This is it right here. I'm just going to test it. If I give my thumbs up, we'll get these out. And
you
it
use
should
that
be
with like your MAME system or something like that?
MAME system, or the Mister. You should be able to use it as well. It's just USB. So for anyone who's just watching, you just got Glenn's CES breaking news right there. So that's it for here. But we both want to thank you. I'm glad you were able to come on. Steven's been talking about you for a while, having you on. I'm glad you were able to come on. And long live the Amiga. I mean, when Commodore went under, I had my big machine. I had a Bomac Tower. I don't know if you know what that is, but that was like a 50-pound steel case you put your 2000 in. I had an M-Plant board, I had an 040 board. I had a 386 SX bridge board that I soldered a 486 processor on it to bring that up. Sound Blaster. I had a 1200 maxed out with an 030 and a 1.76 floppy in it. I had the Opal Vision, so that was stupid. I know, so stupid. And I had a couple of 500s, and I just sold them all for like nothing. And then I killed myself for it. I even had a SideQuest drive. I had because you had your Mac emulator, had all the emulators on there. I had a SideQuest drive, pulled it out. But I was so pissed because I used to read up on AGA, then AAA chipset, and all these things were coming out, and of course they never did. AGA came out. AAA never came out. That's really would have been a game changer. But we live and learn. I sold lots of things I regret. Now I'm able to make some money, more than $5 an hour. So I'm bringing them back.
Nice.
And I'm a huge advocate for that PyStorm. I think that PyStorm, and Steven finally caved and PyStormed his machine.
Well, for my 2000 at least, I thought it needed it for the 2000 at the very least.
It's a nice expansion.
For that machine particularly, yes. And I've only got a 2000, a 1200, and a CD32. That's all my Amigas. So it's there.
All you need.
Yeah,
also,
it's got the basics.
Really quick, we want to make sure everyone knows, if they haven't, you want to go to YouTube right now. Go right now and make sure you go and subscribe to the 10+ minute Amiga Retrocast.
It might be more than 10 minutes.
It might be more than 10 minutes. Rumor. And he also has a website as well, which is just, I think is it 10mark.com? Is that correct?
10mark.com.
Right. So that's what this
Go
actually is right
subscribe.
here.
It's some good Amiga content there and Commodore content in general. What's the Commodore stuff called again? Chicken Lips something or
Chicken Head Chronicles.
Chicken Head, not
Chronicles.
Chicken Lips. Sorry, that's
Not
the logo.
Chicken Lips. Yeah, I thought Chicken Head sounded better than Chicken Lips, but yeah, some people rag on me about that.
So
we
Chicken
did-
Head Chronicles, which is Commodore 64 VIC-20 8-bit,
Right.
focused more. Okay.
So we also got Hobby Hands. Hobby Hands here every week. He gave a $2 super chat. Thank you. My coffin may be molded to look like an A500.
Amiga 500.
Nice.
That'd be kind of cool, actually. Be big, but be cool.
So we
Yeah,
want to
be
thank you.
thin.
We try and keep it down to an hour just because,
Sure.
we don't want people to get, bored. But I want to be huge thanks to all the people in the chat as well. To everyone who saw my CS release of the Akari stick, the 10-minute plus Amiga podcast. Make sure you subscribe to it. We hope we can have you on again.
Yeah, I'd love to.
It'd be awesome. Steven, anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Happy New Year. Game on. And thank you again, Doug, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us tonight. And
Happy to do it.
And we'll be in touch. We'll get you on again for sure.
Yeah,
and
love to.
we'll talk about the new things going on with your Amiga hoarding issues. We'll call it. I'm kidding. So so basically we'll get you on again, and maybe your channel will take a new direction somehow. Whatever, we'll get us all up to speed and stuff like that. So
Wonderful.
yeah, for sure.
Well, I want to give
2020.
him the last words. Is there anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
Well, like I always say, this is Doug from 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out. That's kind of my trademark.
Peace.
Good night, guys.
Have a good night.
I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
At the Tiny Arcade fan page. Remember, don't admire people too much. They'll disappoint you.
Sit, blue, blue, sit.